All right, good evening, everybody. We are calling to order the Tuesday, June 16th meeting of the Corte Madera Town Council. Rebecca, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Casissa?
Here.
Councilmember Lee?
Here.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Here.
Vice Mayor Kuhnhart?
Here.
Mayor Beckman?
Here. Please join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to open time for public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public who want to speak on an item that's not on our agenda to do so. You get 3 minutes per person. I just want to say we've got a lot of people submitting comments via email. So if you submitted a comment via email, but you would prefer to speak verbally, go ahead and speak verbally. And then any emails that we have at the end from people who did not speak verbally, we'll go ahead and read those as well. And we're going to do this for every item. So this right now is just open time for items that are not on the agenda. So if you'd like to speak to an item that's not on the agenda, please raise your hand via Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. We'll go ahead and give people a minute here to put their hands up. Rebecca, how many email comments did we receive for open time?
Thank you, Mayor Beckman. We did not receive any emailed public comments for open time, just for other items that are currently on the agenda.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm not seeing anybody with their hands up. So with that said, seeing no public comment, we're going to go ahead and close open time and move on. There are no presentations, which brings us to the consent calendar. These are items that are routine or have been discussed previously and do not require further discussion. Would any members of the council like to pull an item from the consent calendar? Alrighty, would any members of the public like to pull an item from the consent calendar or comment on an item on the consent calendar? If you want to, please go ahead and raise your hand through Zoom. I'll give you guys a minute. All right, and seeing none, we will bring it back to the council. I would entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
Move to approve items 4A through 4D.
Second.
Great, Rebecca, vote please.
Councilmember Casissa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Mayor Beckman?
Yes. Great, that is the consent calendar. That brings us to item 5, public hearings. Our first public hearing, 5A, is the electric vehicle ordinance number 997. Adam, I believe that's you.
That's great. Thank you, Mayor Beckman and council members. It is a pleasure for me tonight to introduce Bob Brown, our planning consultant for this item. For those who don't know, Bob has really been a leader in the planning field in Marin County for many years, and specifically with respect to sustainability and green building issues. I first met Bob actually as an intern in Bob's office back in 1999. Not to put you on the spot there, Bob, but it is really a pleasure for me to be able to work with Bob on this ordinance, as well as with Brian Fenty. And Bob has been most recently the Community Development Director at the City of Novato, and prior to that, the same position with the City of San Rafael. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bob Brown, who has helped prepare this ordinance and the staff report for us. Good.
Adam, and hello, members of the council. Can you hear me?
Just barely.
It's a little faint.
Okay, let me put this right next to me. So the proposed ordinance for introduction by the council tonight would add a chapter to your building regulations, creating an expedited permit process for electric vehicle charging stations. So this ordinance is very similar to one that your council adopted in 2015. That was an expedited permitting process for residential solar systems. Both ordinances were mandated by state laws as part of the state's greenhouse gas reduction strategies, their attempt to encourage solar power and also the conversion to electric vehicles. The state identified local permitting as one potential impediment to the mass uptake of electric vehicles. So they passed AB 1236 that requires local jurisdictions to have an administrative, ministerial permitting process for EV charging facilities. The proposed ordinance is fairly straightforward and it's consistent with state law. If a proposed charging facility meets all applicable regulations that are contained in a local checklist, which is a draft of which is attached to your staff report. And these include things like meeting all of the applicable building codes. The building official must approve the permit unless he or she can find in writing that the particular charging station or stations would have a specific adverse impact on the public health or safety, in which case a use permit application would be required and would be heard by the zoning administrator and could be appealed to the planning commission. It's sort of hard to imagine a charging station having a public health or safety impact, but nonetheless, this provision exists for unique situations. The law also precludes a jurisdiction from requiring HOA approval of a charging station. The ordinance waives design review since that would be a discretionary permit process and only ministerial is allowed. But any advertising signage that's on, let's say, a commercial charging station would be subject to the regulations in your sign ordinance. We've also attached draft guidelines that would be there to assist applicants. A lot of that has to do with figuring out if their electrical service that exists is sufficient. And we'll also create a web page once the ordinance is adopted. I guess the last comment I'd make is in addition to creating more convenience for your applicants, this ordinance may have some supplemental benefits for the town. Grant funds that are available from time to time for installing EV charging stations, such as the monies that are available from TAM, come with the requirement of having adopted an AB 1236 compliant ordinance. So that will put you in the running for those grant funds. And I think with that, Adam, Brian, I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Fantastic. All right, David, go ahead.
Bob, it's great to see you, and thank you very much for doing this. I really, really appreciate this. I understand that perhaps Tiburon and Larkspur have already passed similar ordinances. I was wondering if there are other jurisdictions at this point who have, and am I right so far?
I think probably about 2/3 of the jurisdictions in the county have approved these ordinances. They're all, again, pretty similar, pretty consistent with state law.
Okay.
Any other questions from council members? If not, we'll go ahead and open up this item to public comment. If you would like to comment verbally on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom. You can also email your comments to publiccomment@tcmmail.org. If you've already emailed a comment about this item, you can speak and we will just take your verbal comment and your written comment will be entered into the public record, but we're not going to read it as well. If you'd prefer for us to just read your email, then there's no need to put your hand up in Zoom. I see David Mahler's got his hand up, so we will get him on here now.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thanks. Thanks so much for this opportunity to comment on this item. I want to strongly recommend that the town council select option 1 in the report to introduce the ordinance and schedule a second reading of the ordinance July 21, 2020. The staff report notes that the ordinance is required to get Corte Madera in compliance with state law AB 1236, and the consultant Bob Brown just mentioned this too. And the staff report also notes that the purpose of the ordinance is to streamline the permitting process for EV charging stations to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles in support of both state and town goals in the state's climate action plan. What the staff doesn't really report in its report is that AB 1236 was passed in 2015 and required compliance by all of California's cities and counties by September 30th, 2017. And I checked the map of compliance just today, and actually only 2 of Marin County's 11 jurisdictions are fully compliant. That's, as Council Member Cunard said, is Larkspur and Tiburon. There are 2 others that are partially compliant, but I want to be clear that this will put Corte Madera into full compliance with that requirement. It's really great to see Corte Madera support its climate action plan and the transition to EVs through adoption of this ordinance. And I'd like to recommend that as you're thinking about this, Corte Madera also think about adopting a formal EV first policy. That would mean that it would first consider purchasing electric vehicles to meet its fleet vehicle needs after analyzing such purchases on a life cycle cost basis. It turns out with life cycle cost, because of its lower operating and maintenance costs, typically more than offset a potentially higher purchase price. Plus, with the purchase price support from the state and local entities such as TAM's EV Fleet Rebate Program, EV purchases can actually be comparable to fossil fuel purchases. So adopting a policy like that would mean that going forward, when Corte Madera wants to purchase electric vehicles, it would do so unless it's not feasible on a life cycle cost basis or there's no EV available to meet its functional requirements. And just like it's doing with adoption of this ordinance, we really need Corte Madera to lead on this and to model this transition to electric vehicles. So thank you for your time, and I hope you'll move ahead on this ordinance.
Thank you, David. All right, there are no other hands up. So Rebecca, if we have any other email comments on this that you want to read, we can go ahead. Otherwise, that would be it for public comment.
Thank you, Mayor Beckman. We have not received any written emails regarding this item.
Okay, then we will close public comment and bring it back to the council for comments and discussion. Are there any council comments? David?
I'm very much in support of this. I really thank Bob for his presentation and his work on this across the county. There's one tidbit that I would add, which is that there's another potential source of funding that is available. MCE Clean Energy is applying for a state grant that will allow it to work throughout its service area, including in Marin, obviously, to do more EV charging support and other. And in order for them to qualify for that CEC money, California Energy Commission money, it's much, much better if all of the jurisdictions that they're serving are already compliant with AB 1236. So I urge us to go ahead and pass this.
Thank you. Adam, I couldn't tell. Were you raising your hand? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention since, I'm sorry. I just wanted to mention since it was mentioned by the commenter and also it is in our staff report, but just to clarify that we would be bringing this back for a second reading on, I believe it's July 7th, not July 21st, if indeed the council decides to introduce this ordinance this evening.
Thank you. All right, other council comments? Charles.
I too can support this and I'm excited about what it means for the future of the town and being in compliance with the state, but also happy that the commentator from the public also brought up future funding and availability for electrification of fleet vehicles. And so I just would like to ask staff how that process would come about, if that's something that could be agendized in the future, and if that's something that the council as a whole would be interested in exploring for the town moving forward. So.
Yeah, yeah. Todd, did you want to speak to that, or Adam? I don't know.
I'll take a crack at that. I mean, yeah. Certainly we'd be happy to look for direction from the council on whether or not that is something that the council wants staff to look into, whether that's grant funding or other sort of ways to incentivize or frankly implement electric vehicle charging stations, either through zoning ordinance, the zoning ordinance, or even on town property. So it's something we certainly could look at a future agenda item. But I also think, you know, now with the council having a subcommittee, I think focused on sustainability actions, that's something as well that the committee could take up and sort of make some recommendations to the council. And then in that process, we could move forward in that regard. But it's something we're looking at regardless as staff for town properties. But if we wanted to go broader than that, we'd be happy to hear from council on any suggestions they may have.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Any other council comments on this item?
Do we even need another ordinance if it's a fleet purchasing process that would fall within the normal authority of town manager? And if the judgment comes out in favor of the cost benefit, life cycle cost benefit for EVs, as I think it often would, do we even need a follow-on ordinance for fleets?
And I just want to clarify real fast with the town attorney that this is a discussion that we're able to get into right now, given that this is not really the agenda item.
Yeah, good point.
I think that I would suggest that you put this on for a future item.
Okay, fantastic. Then we'll ask staff to come back at a future time with an item for us to discuss a potential EV first policy. And for now, we'll turn our attention back to the matter at hand, this EV ordinance. Are there any other council comments on this? And if not, I would entertain a motion to introduce ordinance 997.
So moved.
I'll second.
Great. Rebecca, could we have a vote, please?
Councilmember Casissa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Mayor Beckman?
Yes. Alrighty, that brings us to 5B, which is first reading and possible introduction of ordinance 998, which is a revision to the tree ordinance as pertains to pyrophytic trees. All right, is there a staff report?
There is. Hi, everyone. This is a pleasure to be before you tonight. Thank you. I'm going to start with a little background, if that's okay. In 1995, the Town Council adopted the existing tree ordinance that's set forth in Chapter 15.50 of the town's municipal code. Pursuant to this chapter, the removal of a tree requires a tree permit unless specifically exempted. Trees below permit size, meaning those trees that are less than 50 inches in circumference or less than 120 inches for multi-stem trees, do not require a tree permit for removal, nor do any of the defined undesirable species, nor is a permit needed in emergency situations or removals that are related to view or sunlight claims. The removal of trees that don't qualify for one of these exemptions requires submittal of a tree permit application. A tree permit is a discretionary process, which, as I explained in great detail in the staff report, it has associated time and cost and a level of uncertainty for the applicant. The average tree permit process from application date to effective date typically takes approximately 1 month. And in an appeal situation, that time frame would be much longer. The town council would hear any appeal on a tree permit application. Currently, the ordinance does not involve the planning commission in a appeal of a tree permit. Since January 2016, the town has issued 82 tree permits, which is equivalent to approximately 20 tree permits each year. The intent of the amendments that Ruben and I are bringing forward to you tonight are to provide a procedure by which a fire-prone tree, only when it's also deemed a fire hazard by the fire code official, can be reviewed and potentially authorized for removal in a more streamlined way. First, the proposed ordinance would add a definition of fire-prone trees. The Central Marin Fire Authority has utilized the pyrophytic and hazardous tree list as a reference in vegetation management and fire fuel reduction programs since 2017. This is attachment 3 to the staff report. The list is representative of fire-prone trees common within Marin County that ignite readily and burn intensely. And the defined list of fire-prone trees you find in the proposed ordinance is consistent with that list. It's only in alphabetical order is the difference. Consistent with the list used by Central Marin Fire Authority. And it will limit the number and variety of trees that might require inspection by the fire code official to only those trees that are known to be susceptible to fire. Second, the ordinance establishes a process for evaluation of a fire-prone tree. A fire-prone tree that doesn't otherwise qualify for one of the exemptions can only be removed without obtaining a tree permit if it's deemed a fire hazard. The procedure is two-step. First, the town would verify the tree is one of the defined fire-prone trees and is eligible for inspection. Second, the acting fire chief would then need to investigate and determine that whole tree removal is the only option to mitigate the fire hazard. Thirdly, the proposed ordinance makes trees on public property eligible for the same procedure. And currently, the removal of a tree on public property is only eligible for an exemption to tree permit requirements in emergency situations. And fourth, the proposed ordinance will clean up an error regarding the tree permit fee. This is not a new fee. The community development fee schedule was adopted by resolution of the town council in May 2015, and it included a $100 fee for tree permits. However, the tree ordinance was not subsequently updated in accord with this change. And lastly, just in conclusion, the proposed ordinance is intended to remove the time and costs and uncertainty associated with obtaining a tree permit for fire-prone tree species only when the fire code official determines the removal of the fire-prone tree is consistent with Central Marin Fire Authority vegetation management policies. And with that, Ruben is on the call, as you can see, and both of us are available to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. Are there questions from council? Oh, sorry, what was it? Thought I heard something. Anyway, are there questions from council on this? Charles.
Hi, Ruben. Good to see you. You know, we've had a couple comments from via letter, and I just wanted some clarification. They had mentioned that the new authority for from the tax is currently in conversation about these tree types and whether there would be a county-wide initiative to establish and figure out whether these should be designated as such, and therefore asked us to pause. And so if it is under the authority of the Central Marin Fire Department, are you also then going to adopt those same policies that the larger body is going to have? And so therefore whatever's resolved in that conversation would also be adopted internally for you? Or could it cause, you know, a break between Corte Madera policy about trees and the larger Marin County policies?
Thank you, members of the council. With the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority as the JPA or governing body for fire prevention within the county, still looks at the local agencies for any type of enforcement and municipal action. So these trees may be included within the existing list, as we're all using the same sources of where we're getting the information on which trees are considered hazardous and or fire prone. Most of these trees, if not all of them, were derived from Fire Safe Marin, which is one of the educating components through the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. So I'm making the assumption that most of these trees will end up on that list if they tend to use a list. Otherwise, they start using trees as fire-prone characteristics, which is usually your pine-type trees and your fine, flashier fuels.
Okay, and then to follow up on that, some of the other concerns that they brought up was slope stabilization and environmental conditions, as they would be, you know, kind of heritage trees that are, you know, California indigenous. So what type of environmental impacts that would have. They were just wanting to have that discussion. Is there criteria in which the fire chief or inspector would actually evaluate the trees for those on top of the fire danger, or is it only fire danger and therefore those are not addressed through your process and checklist?
Yeah, so through defensible space and tree removal, we play a happy balance or a real thin walk at the line between environmental concerns, slope and erosion control, and fire mitigation. So the thing with the fire department, we don't want to remove something and cause a bigger problem down the road. For example, right now we require certain types of ground cover vegetation to be removed. For example, French broom and Scotch broom gets removed from hillsides. However, if we deem that the hillside may be unstable because of the removal, then we find other mitigating efforts and try to maintain the stability of the hillside. And then we also play a fine balance with the environmental concerns. What type of habitat is it where the tree is? You know, are there spotted owls using the trees for nesting and so forth? So it isn't a clean slate or carte blanche to have these trees removed. What it does, it allows both the fire department and town staff to be able to make the determination to streamline the process if there is a tree that meets this heritage tree size to be able to be removed other than going through the entire permitting process, which could take up to 60 days.
Thank you very much. That was exactly what I'd like to hear as far as the process as it is now designated.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Ruben. That was a good question. I just want to jump in just because I have a very similar question. I was just curious, Ruben, do you think you could speak a little more about the kind of criteria that might define one of these trees as a fire hazard? Because from reading the staff report, it seems pretty clear that we're talking about trees that are in, you know, within the defensible space immediately around a structure that are, you know, having an adverse impact on ingress or egress to these neighborhoods, or that are like, you know, kind of choking off evacuation routes. Is that pretty much, are those like the main situations where you envision possibly using, you know, where you envision this ordinance coming into play? Or is there, can you easily imagine situations outside of that?
No, this is primarily along our evacuation routes where we're coming across clearing trees, and we may come across a situation where a tree is either too far gone in its health conditions, or it's leaning or encroaching into the roadway where the only way to maintain it is to remove it, otherwise we'll kill the tree. Right. Those instances would then, right now, would require the fire department to go ahead and then to go through the entire permit process to have that one tree removed. The other portion that we haven't removed is usually within that defensible space zone, but necessarily doesn't mean the tree needs to be removed if it is within that 100-foot or 30-foot zone if it's properly maintained. So a mature bay tree, a mature Douglas fir tree necessarily isn't a hazard if it's properly maintained. So it's all about the maintenance. However, there are certain instances where the tree may have to be removed.
Got it. And for trees that are in like open space, like say, you know, the groves of bay trees that we have on Ring Mountain, for example, that the ordinance wouldn't really come into play there, right? Because
no,
that's
it doesn't.
Nothing to do.
No, it doesn't. Everything surrounds the 30-foot to 100-foot zone around a home or within our 10 feet of evacuation routes if we need to.
Thanks. That's really helpful because I know that there were members of the public who were concerned that this might be opening the door to, like, you know, removing entire species of trees from Corte Madera, and it's pretty clear that that's not the direction that this is headed. So thank you.
Yeah, we don't have the intent to go ahead and start clear cutting our entire hillsides. That's not the intent of the ordinance. The ordinance is designed to try to assist homeowners and to streamline the process when we find a hazardous tree that does need to be required to be removed, to go ahead and start that process sooner rather than later.
Thank you. All right, David.
Two quick questions, please. One is that on our earlier list of undesirable species, Lombardy poplar appears, and it's not on this new list of pyrophytic and hazardous trees. I'm curious about why. And the other question is really kind of a bigger question. Don't you think there's a risk, Ruben? We all trust your judgment, but don't you think there's a risk that when there's the sort of the big bad red list printed with no explanation, that it gets out into the public as being this is the bad boy list, and those should be, all of those species should be considered hazards without regard to your specific judgment of danger to structures? Don't you think there's a risk of that?
I think it's in the interpretation. The list was originally derived for the fire inspectors and town staff to be able to identify what species are considered fire prone based on the characteristics that were outlined within Fire Safe Marin. The intent wasn't to go out there and put a big bad list of undesirable trees, because you can have a tree that's on that list that theoretically is not an immediate hazard. For example, eucalyptus is a fire-prone, non-desirable tree. However, if it's well maintained with all the ladder fields removed and all the debris that comes down with it, it can be a safe tree.
How about the Lombardy poplar? Did we just miss on that one?
So Lombardy poplar, I believe, may have been more of an undesirable tree as a town. It wasn't a tree on the list for the fire department for fire hazard trees. But Tracy may be able to follow up on that.
The undesirable species list has a list of trees that are known to have issues, and there's a variety of issues or reasons why those trees would show up on the list. Flammability, large size, fast growth, poor structure, invasive species, and the potential to damage infrastructure, so large, shallow root systems. So the Lombardy may be on there, because it has the potential to damage infrastructure versus being highly flammable. And you are correct, the lists do overlap, but there's sort of a multitude of reasons why a tree might be undesirable versus just be.
And can I get a bonus question? Running bamboo or creeping bamboo is not on either list. Is that because it's not a tree, it's a grass?
That's correct.
We have a very loose definition of tree in the code. It says any woody plant, but if somebody came in and asked for a tree permit for bamboo, I would obviously check with Adam, but I would not make them apply for a tree permit for that, removal of bamboo.
Yeah, Charles?
I just had one more question for Tracy about the difference, because as I was evaluating today, is it my understanding that undesirables are almost all invasive or non-native? And what you different that basically some of the public has spoken about in this pyrophytic evaluation is that they're native species, and so therefore the more environmental awareness that they've caught on to, and why you see them show up in one or the other or not at all. Is that a correct read on my part, or are there actually species in the undesirables?
Yeah, the undesirables was added. We had, at the time, we had a town arborist who determined sort of this wide variety. Like I said, it states they possess any or all of the following characteristics: fast growth, large size, extreme flammability, poor structure, invasive roots, introduced species, as he said, and relatively short lifespan. So I think there's overlap with some of those characteristics, yes. But you have on undesirables, you do have Monterey pine on there. And so I think that, which I believe is a California tree, not necessarily indigenous to the Bay Area, but I think there's a variety of reasons. It's not solely invasive, but yes, generally speaking, it's very easy for someone to look at that undesirables list and agree with it.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that also in discussing it, and just my understanding is ultimately if we're making decisions about California natives, I think being aware of the biome or the bioregion in which Corte Madera is in helps people understand whether it's appropriate in this area, right? Like, because redwoods might not grow out in the flats because it's, their taproot can't grow, right? So I think these big picture moves and saying, oh, all California natives are legitimate when they wouldn't sustain themselves naturally. It's only like, if ultimately that becomes an issue, we're going to have to define it more clearly about why, whether they're appropriate and whether that's just a pass. So in discussions that I've had with a few people. So not saying we're going to resolve it tonight, but I think that a deeper evaluation of trees and their effects and an environmental kind of understanding of them when we make these ordinances would be helpful for all of us in evaluating it.
Thanks, Charles. Any other questions from council members right now? Yeah, Fred, and then Bob.
Sorry. Once it's deemed a fire hazard, there's no appeal process, right? If I'm a neighbor, to me, if I'm a neighbor, it's going to benefit me if somebody's cutting down a tree that's deemed a fire hazard. But I could see the flip side where you're going to have a neighbor that's going to go, oh, I don't want the tree cut down for whatever reason. So is there any type of appeal process or notification to neighbors, or once it's deemed a fire hazard, that's it, I can go ahead and start cutting?
Currently, right now, once we evaluate the tree as a fire hazard, it basically streamlines the process, and then the I would go ahead and notify the building and planning department that this tree has been identified as a fire hazard and recommend its removal for safety. Then you can go ahead and start cutting. And that's the process right now. However, we have evaluated trees that are on this species that have not been deemed a fire hazard. For example, today I was looking at a tree, a big bay tree that met the definition of a heritage tree that was within 5 feet of a home. However, the way it was maintained was not a fire hazard. Now, whether that tree was causing structural damage to the home or not, that's a different story. They would have to then get an arborist report.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ruben. Good question, Fred.
I couldn't tell if Adam wanted to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. In fact, that's one of the reasons, Councilmember Casisa, why this ordinance, we're introducing this ordinance this evening actually, is because in that situation, if we didn't have this ordinance, in fact, that same individual could apply for removing that tree, but there could very well be there would be a noticing period of 10 days. There would be a decision by the planning director, and then there would be an appeal period, and that tree or the removal of that tree, even if it was designated a fire hazard, could be appealed, and the process obviously could be lengthened and the cost significant to the individual homeowner who was trying to remove that hazardous tree as determined by the fire chief. So just wanted to add that.
Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Bob.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to clarify after David's question, and I think it's already actually been clarified, which is, looking at that list of species, I think it's really clear, though, that the permit is exempt only if it is deemed a fire hazard by the fire marshal. So it's not like you can just say, I have this type of tree, I want to remove it, I don't need a permit. You actually have to have the fire marshal certified that it's an issue. Did I interpret that correctly from the report?
Yes, that's correct.
Awesome, thanks, Bob. I just have one last question, then we'll go to public comment. I was just curious for Ruben, I assume you would, but just to confirm, if you go out and inspect a tree on somebody's property that's like, say within their defensible space, and you identify it as a tree that's currently a fire hazard, but you recognize a way in which it could be mitigated or maintained, without cutting it down to bring it back into being safe, would you be able to develop a plan with the homeowner or whoever the property owner is and work to maintain that tree and bring it back into a safe condition rather than just going ahead and getting rid of it?
Yeah, so the only way the fire department mandates a tree to be removed is whether it's dead or dying. That's the only way I would go ahead and have a notice given to the homeowner saying you have to remove this tree, because that's the extreme condition. Now, if we go out there and say, for example, they've got a Douglas fir, for example, that's right next to their home, and they say, I need to remove it because my insurance company is dropping my policy because I've got this tree within 4 feet of my house. I need to get it cut down. And I go, well, actually, the tree is not the hazard. All you need to do is remove 2 or 3 limbs, and then we'll bring it into compliance, and I can write you a letter stating that the tree is not a hazard and you meet the requirements for defensible space. So every tree, the goal isn't to cut down trees. We're not trying to remove trees. The goal is to try to keep as many mature trees as we possibly can in a healthy environment. And the number one goal is removing the hazards that exist. And unfortunately, sometimes some trees need to get removed to be able to meet those goals of fire safety.
Awesome, thanks, Ruben. That was really helpful. Any last questions from council before we go to public comment? Okay, then we're going to go ahead and open this up for public comment. If you would like to comment verbally on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand via Zoom. If you submitted an email comment and you'd rather have that read, then no need to comment. We'll read any comments at the end of this that were submitted by people who didn't speak. Laura Lovett is first in line, so we'll get Laura on here. Hi, Laura.
Hi. Since I'm the person who wrote to David and I'm also the person who's been managing this project, I thought I would give you guys some background. There has been a committee comprised of the Native Plant Society, some Native Plant Society members and some Marin Conservation League members have been working for 1.5 years with the fire chief and with Fire Safe Marin on the whole issue of plant lists. We have vastly redone the okay to plant list, which is almost ready. It's got some questions for the fire people that we just have to clear or remove. And we haven't quite gotten to the fire prone plant list, although we've discussed it verbally. I've gone through all of this fairly extensively, most recently with Battalion Chief Christy Neal and Jordan Reeser. All of this got brought to a halt because of the confusion this spring. Not only do we have a virus, but we had a new JPA, and the fire people were not only putting out a fire, they were establishing a new agency. So it just didn't seem necessary to jump in and push them to talk about this subject when they had so much else on their plates. Your putting this on your agenda has sort of jump-started it again. We had every intention of picking up the conversation again. The original conversation with Chief Weber was, you know, could we talk to the fire departments? Could we come to an agreement where we were all on board? And he was absolutely in favor of that. He was immediately approved of trying to get into a conversation with all of us. It's just that he's a very busy man and we haven't been able to finalize the list. So what we were doing, or what I was doing when I was writing you to postpone, is simply to allow us to finish that process, which we had put on hold this spring. And then we will have what we hope is a modified list of fire prone and a very modified and expanded list of really good to plant trees if you take one down. We're very far along on both of those things. We just haven't completed them. So if you let us complete them, then it should be easy and non-controversial to go forward with an ordinance. What we are hearing from your fire chief is what I have heard from the fire departments on every level. You know, come talk to us, ask us about this. We can limit up, we can discuss it, etc. They are very open. The problem is people do not get that far. They see a list that says, don't plant, bad tree.
And Laura, that's gonna. I'm gonna have to ask you to wrap up. That was your 3 minutes.
That's it. Yeah, I mean, I'd like, you know, the conversation from the fire departments and the list don't get combined. People see the list and they take action based on it because they do not know it's negotiable.
Thank you, Laura. All righty. Next up is Lucinda Smith. Get Lucinda on here. Hi, Lucinda.
Good evening. Ruben and I have had multiple discussions about the eucalyptus tree at the intersection of Sausalito and Alta Way. I'm not sure what determines a tree to be a heritage tree, but this one certainly in my book would qualify. And I'm wondering if it's properly maintained and limbed properly. Is there any way that we might be able to work out a situation where it doesn't have to be removed? It is on public property, not on a residential property. So would we be notified if that's going to go forward and be removed? Thank you.
Thank you, Lucinda. All right, I don't know if staff wants to respond to that real fast or if we should just keep moving through these.
I recommend we keep moving through the questions.
All right, sounds good. All right, we're going to move on. Robinson is up next year.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I have sort of a parochial procedural question. If a resident is aware of adjoining properties that have mature trees that are clearly dead and pose a hazard not only to their structure but to other structures surrounding it, what does our chief recommend in terms of first contact? Would that be the fire marshal, the Central Marin Fire Authority, or our new countywide fire authority to ensure that at least someone takes an opportunity to take a look at that and see if our opinion or someone else's opinion of that condition, that tree is either verified or determined not to be a problem? How is that best handled? And I guess the other question is, if we have hazardous trees throughout the community, I don't know that we do or have how many we have, but is that going to be handled on a complaint basis, or is there going to be a initiative taken to inventory those trees and sort of evaluate them and let the property owners that they have a risk that could be a risk to them and to others? And thanks for the opportunity to address you tonight. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, and then last up here is David Long. Hi, David.
David Long. I'm with the Native Plant Society and a group called FERN, Fire and Environmental Resilience Network. I've submitted comments and I won't repeat them. I just want to comment on several of the things that were said. First, I would say that if we could be assured that fire personnel were as responsible and were as aware of best practices as Chief Martin, we would have few concerns. But I would have to say that within our memory, there has been fire leadership in this county that did not do best practices and frankly savaged some native plant habitat. I remind you that this is a law that is not for just this season or this administration, but for everybody that will come in the future. And I just wanted to comment on several things. The analyst mentioned that it would only be done when there was an option that it couldn't be mitigated any other way. Well, I want to point out that that's not in the proposed ordinance. That may be an understanding, but it would certainly enhance the ordinance to require that. Also, everything has been talked about as single trees. Yet as I read the ordinance, it could be used to clear multiple trees. In fact, a whole ecosystem of trees on a particular property. And yet there would be very little review. Remember that the only town determination is whether the trees are of a certain species. There's no environmental review there. And I suspect that the environmental review, there's no necessity of environmental review to be made by the fire personnel. They just have to determine that it's a fire hazard. And as I pointed out in the comment, once you've labeled something fire prone, it's not a stretch to say it's a fire hazard without a whole lot of extra embellishment or facts, if you want to. I'm not saying that Chief Martin would do that, because I hear that best practices being talked about, but it could be. And I'm just worried about the statute, an ordinance that is open to so many interpretations and abuse. One possibility would be to say that if it's only a single tree on the property being taken out, it's exempt. But if you have multiple trees being taken out, then they would have to get a permit. That raises a whole lot of questions of whether you're destroying a whole native plant, a whole native tree ecosystem when you're taking out multiple trees. I don't see that that's being done now, but it certainly could be under this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That is all the hands that we have up at this time. Rebecca, are there any email comments that you want to read from folks who have not spoken?
Thank you, Mayor Beckman. We have several emails that were received to public comment at tcmmail.org and also to staff after the publication of the packet. They are published on our website. Some are multiple comments, so I'm going to keep my timer and try to read 3 minutes of each email. And if I don't make it through the entire comments for a particular person, they are posted on our website.
Great, okay, so they'll all be in the public record in full.
Okay, first one was received from Jean Greenbaum, who says, "Dear Town Council and staff, I want to voice my strong opposition to the new proposed ordinance that would ease the way for tree removals in Corte Madera. It is overkill, literally. Specifically, the list of fire-prone trees is expanding to include native California trees with no justification other than they are trees that burn easily in wildfires. What I gleaned from the staff report is that this action to add more fire-prone species is to make it easier for the Central Marin Fire Authority to clear-cut areas to further increase defensible space, improve ingress and egress for first responders, and reduce the amount of hazardous fuels that are located along primary and secondary evacuation routes. Those are legitimate reasons for the new list of trees. So if that is the purpose, then restrict removal of trees for that purpose only and not put every tree on a hit list for anyone to remove as long as a fire officer says it's okay. The reason for some of these trees being added to the list is questionable. The acacia that you propose to add, while not native to California, is described by Wikipedia as having evolved its fire resistance over 20 million years ago. If that is true, why is this fire-resistant species on the list? I am not a tree expert and don't claim to be. I don't know if arborists have weighed in on this, but the proposed tree ordinance is the antithesis of Corte Madera General Plan, which professes to recognize the value of trees. Marin is Marin because of its trees and the wildlife that require those trees for their survival. Poor tree maintenance, not removing dead trees, and tree waste at ground level are the real fire hazards, not the trees. There are dissenting voices in policies to thin out forests for fire prevention, while admittedly they are currently on the fringe of the debate. There are very dangerous trees such as junipers that belong on that list, but I would ask that the town be very careful about adding too many living species that don't really belong there. I know fire danger is very real and ever increasing as the climate changes, but fear should not be the only driver of policy changes. From Jean Greenbaum. Okay, the next email is from Bob Bundy, who says, I had discussed adding to the ordinance a definition of trees that are in the median strips and damaging the sidewalks. In Mariner Cove, this is almost exclusively liquid amber trees. In addition to disrupting the sidewalks, they are becoming post-mature and some are in danger of dropping limbs or the entire tree going down. I had talked with Adam about adding these to the ordinance so homeowners wanting to take these trees down and repair the sidewalks do not have to contact an arborist or pay a fee to take down the tree. I believe Adam discussed an option where the homeowner would take a picture of the tree and the sidewalk and send it to planning to have approval. I believe this should be added to the ordinance. Bob. And following that, we have an email from Scott Busey who says, I would propose to expand the scope of what can be removed without a permit to include any tree determined to be a fire hazard by the fire code official, even if it is not one of the, quote, fire-prone trees, unquote. From Scott Busey. Okay, and then the final, I think the final one that I have is from David Lewis. And this is a two-part email that I may not get to both parts. Good evening, and thank you for reaching out to me. As I shared with Tracy earlier today, we are partnering with Fire Safe Marin to bring a comprehensive educational message to homeowners, including a recently released educational video. As an update, we in the University of California Cooperative Extension are no longer distributing and teaching from any pyrophytic and hazardous tree list. We are instead teaching from a publication in revision based on field and lab research to provide homeowners with the most up-to-date science-based information for managing and maintaining landscapes for multiple objectives, including fuels and fire management. Examples and resources are available through the UC Marin Master Gardener Fire Smart Landscaping and UC Agricultural and Natural Resources Fire in California. Thank you for understanding that what was developed and published previously by our predecessors and what is now being compiled and extended is part of the normal process of science and education advancing. We look forward to continuing to work with you, the town, and residents of Corte Madera and Fire Safe Marin going forward. Thank you, David Lewis, Director of the UC Cooperative Extension, Marin. And I think, I still have a minute and a half. I'll read more of his email, who says, David Lewis continued with his original email stating he wants to reach out to us today as we go into our session tonight on the town of Corte Madera's proposed amendment to the tree ordinance. I am the director for the UC Cooperative Extension, including the Marin Master Gardeners. Also covered on this message is Stephen Swain, UC-CE, Environmental Horticulture Advisor, and Faye Mark, UC Marin, Master Gardener, Fire Smart Landscaping, and Team Leader. I hope that we can be a resource for you, as we already are for many homeowners and organizations throughout Marin on home gardening, landscaping, and natural resources management. We are partnering with Fire Safe Marin to bring a comprehensive education message to homeowners, including a recently released education video. One useful update for you, given the amendment project you are leading, is that the University of California Cooperative Extension in Marin and across the state is no longer distributing and teaching from any paraphyletic and hazardous tree list. We are instead teaching from a publication based on field lab research to provide homeowners with the most up-to-date science-based information for managing and maintaining landscapes for multiple objectives, including fuels and fire management. I am almost out of time, but I did want to say that these emails are uploaded to the website, and this one in particular refers to several items that are hyperlinked and also include charts and graphs for viewers at home to look at online. And that concludes the emails that were received prior to the meeting and after publication of the agenda. And I'll just check public comment at tcmmail.org one more time.
Perfect. Thank you.
No additional email was received.
Awesome. Okay, and there are no further hands up. So seeing no more public comment, we're going to close public comment and bring it back to the council for comments and discussion. Who would like to start us off? Bob.
Sure. First off, Tracy, thank you for a terrific report. Really thorough, really well thought out. And I think, you know, I had very few questions after reading it, so thank you. I had the benefit, along with a couple of our other council members a few months ago, of doing a 2-hour tour with Ruben, where we looked at, you know, what had been done with vegetation management in town, and heard Ruben talk about it and how he approached it and what he did and why he did things. And after doing that, I have absolute 150% confidence in Ruben and anybody Ruben designates in their judgment in, you know, moving forward with this, because it says this permit is only exempt if it's deemed a fire hazard by the fire marshal, and then it can be removed without a tree permit. These guys know what they're doing. They're making brilliant judgments. We need fire safety, and I have complete confidence in their ability. So I'm all for this. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Who else would like to speak? David?
Yeah, I too was on that tour, and I too have unquestioned confidence in Chief Ruben Martin, who I think has fabulous advice and a good way of delivering it. I have a very specific suggestion to make about this freestanding list, which starts with the red, Central Marin Fire Authority on the top, because I like Gene Greenbaum. If a person as smart and careful as Gene can, let's say, take this perhaps out of the context that our staff and we are thinking of this, then I think others could as well. And so I'm worried about the use of a freestanding list like this. And there are two suggestions that I make, or possibly three. One is that I would add an asterisk to just a few of these, and then I have a note to suggest that we add. And the species that I would add an asterisk to, after doing some additional research and conversation with folks who know much better than I do: California Bay, Bishop Pine, Torrey Pine, and Douglas Fir. I would put an asterisk next to each of those. And at the bottom, I would say this species group consists of native trees with many environmental benefits and should be removed only where the fire marshal deems a tree to be a specific hazard to structure or residence. I can read that again, or I can put it in an email to staff if you like. The second note that I would put on the bottom is to refer folks to the UC Cooperative Extension Service and to FERN, the organization that's helping the Fire JPA on environmental policy and benefits, so that there is an opening to further understanding of the role of these tree species in the environment. And the final suggestion I would make is that I was really, really glad to hear Laura Lovett report that they're coming close to the end of the good trees list. And I've been hearing about that, and certainly Fire Safe Marin and Todd Landau have in their publications, not just the bad trees, but also the good trees that need to be planted and should be planted instead of pyrophytic trees. And I would very much like to see that good list be included wherever there is a bad list coming out, right? So that people understand that trees per se are not bad. They can be very good and are absolutely necessary for carbon sequestration and oxygen production and health of the flora and fauna around us. I can put this, what I've just said, in writing if you like, if you think it's a good suggestion. And I think it probably will continue. I don't want to pull this. I think the conversation will likely to continue among these well-meaning groups of folks. And yet I think that that list should be, if you will, corrected or annotated. Thank you.
Who else would like to speak? All right, I'll just jump in real fast. And I just want to say, you know, I take tree removal very seriously, and especially when it comes to native species. You know, preserving and honestly restoring the ecosystem is one of my top priorities. But it's clear to me in reading what we've got here that this is a very narrow and deliberate and well-crafted piece of legislation here. You know, in reading the entirety of the ordinance and the amendment to the Muni Code and the staff report, I'm not concerned that this is going to be used as, you know, some sort of cover to clear cut. I think it's very clear that this is really only intended to apply to specific situations, specific types of trees located in specific places where they cause specific threats. So I'm really satisfied with the way it's written. I think it's plenty narrow, that it's not going to provide for any sort of widespread ecosystem destruction. I think it, you know, protects public safety in critical ways. I also will just say that when I first heard that this ordinance was in the pipeline on its way to us, I spoke with Adam a little bit because I had the same question as David, and I think several of us about, you know, okay, I get it that we need to have a list of trees that are fire hazards so that people need to know that. But I had the same thought of, you know, can we also put out a list of good trees that we want to be, if we're removing invasive or non-native or dangerous trees, can we have a list of trees that are beneficial or native and actually support the local ecosystem? Can we put that out there? Adam was really fantastic and worked with me and helped me understand that, yes, you know, policy-wise, yes, this particular item is not really the vehicle for that, is what I learned. And there are other ways that we can do that as a council, which I would really look forward to coming to us in the future. I think one was a water efficiency landscaping ordinance, if I got that right. Something along those lines that's coming up to us that speaks directly to native species in the context of the fact that, you know, native species obviously require less watering because they're you know, evolved for the environment where we are here. Long story short, you know, I see tools coming to us in the future where we're going to be able to keep making progress on not only identifying dangerous trees, but identifying plant species that are good and native and beneficial and that we want to encourage people to be planting. So I'm excited that that's coming forward outside of what we're doing here tonight. And then I guess the last thing I'll say is just I would support David's two little modifications to this you know, hazardous tree list. I don't know if that's even technically within the scope of what we're being asked to do here tonight, but I'd support just noting which ones are native species and driving home, if we can, that you know, we don't want to be taking them out unless they're really causing a hazard. But other than that, you know, I support this ordinance. Anybody else? Yeah, Charles.
I too can stand behind what David added to that. I think that addresses some of the issues that have been brought up. I think it's ironic that a town that basically translates to cut wood is skeptical about cutting down trees, but yeah, I appreciate that because we've learned from our past histories, right? So in that, I feel like there's a lot of dialogue still to be had. I hear it from really important groups of educated scientists and advocates, and I want to make sure that those voices continue and are listened to help basically, you know, make Marin what's made Marin great all along, and why people come here. In this instance, I think we're about to go into a really intense fire season. I think we're already seeing that way too early. And I think there's a lot of concerned residents, and I think this is a safety issue. I don't think it will be abused, and so therefore I can kind of make the findings and support this ordinance in its current state with the modifications that David suggested.
Thanks, Charles. Fred?
Yeah, I too support the ordinance and also with David's comments. And I also have total trust in Ruben for doing the right thing. The only thing I'd like to see is maybe after maybe 60 days or so after we pass this, to have staff come back to us and give us an update how many fell into fire hazard, fell into under that area or so. So we just get an idea of what's going on with that process.
Awesome. Thank you, Fred. So it sounds like we're all on board then. So if that's the case, I would entertain a motion to introduce ordinance number 998 with added direction to staff that we please note the native species on here per David's comments, as well as put a little footnote referring people to Fern, I believe was the organization. David, you can make the motion.
Fern, yes, Fern, the Fire and Environmental Resilience Network, and UC Cooperative Extension Service as additional sources of good information. I'll write that up and send it in to staff if you're in agreement.
May I ask, Mr. Mayor? May I ask Councilmember Kuhnhart to just read the note at the bottom?
One more time.
Only where the fire marshal. I want to make sure that I listen to it fully to make sure it accomplishes all the purposes that Ruben needs it to be able to accomplish.
Okay. What I was going to suggest was that the note say, and this would note for California Bay, Bishop Pine, Torrey Pine, and Douglas Fir, that this species group consists of native trees with many environmental benefits and should be removed only where the fire marshal deems a tree to be a specific hazard to a structure or residence.
Doesn't it already say that?
Yes and no. Yeah, the ordinance does say that, Bob, but this is going to get published and it's going to go out broadly and it's going to go across the county without the language in our ordinance.
He wants it on the list as well, Bob.
Just on the list. The list that's on page 23 in the staff report.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so with that direction to staff, we can take a motion on introducing this ordinance.
So moved.
All right, David has moved to introduce ordinance 998. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
All righty, thank you. Could we have a vote, please, Rebecca?
Councilmember Casissa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Mayor Beckman?
Yes. All righty, thank you. That concludes our public hearings and brings us to business items. Our first business item is 6A, which is a summary of the April 20th, 2020 Town Council Strategic Planning Workshop and the proposed work plan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. I just wanted to say briefly, we didn't answer a couple questions on the last agenda item, so I just want Jim Robinson and Lucinda Smith to know that we'll follow up with you on your question specific to the tree, Lucinda. And then to Jim, to your question, we would, it falls under the purview of the fire marshal, but we'll follow up with you with that. We have jurisdiction on a scenario that you gave. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
For those. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So each calendar year, the town council holds a strategic planning session to discuss the projected workload for the next 12 months and beyond. What's before you is probably more of an 18-month project list. We held a strategic planning session. It was intended to provide a broad overview of the town's anticipated work program. Council provides general direction to staff, focusing on when issues should be presented during the year and what complications the staff might analyze for those issues. It is the council's practice to have staff present a summary of the workshop discussion. So as stated by the mayor, we held a workshop earlier this year and had a pretty good 4-hour plus conversation with the council. The council presented basically overall priorities, and the council broke up the priorities into 3 categories. They're listed on page 1 and 2 of your staff report. And I just want to very briefly summarize those categories. Category 1, there are 5 sections in category 1. Of course, at the top, it's the COVID-19 recovery, and that's repairing our town finances and supporting local businesses and those residents that are vulnerable to what is going on. And a lot of our discussions and focus over the last 2 months has really been in that area, and that'll continue. Fiscal sustainability is at the top of the council's list as a category 1 priority. That continues to be the unfunded liabilities. We've currently built up $6 million in reserve funds over the last few years, preparing to speak to those liabilities moving forward, as well as protecting reoccurring revenues, controlling costs, and looking at shared services and consolidation townwide when appropriate. We currently have $30 million in cash. That is very important at the moment for the sanitary district and the town's general fund as we go through the crisis that we are now. Number 3 under priorities in category 1 are climate hazards, as well as a communication plan and disaster planning. Category 2, there are 3 areas listed in category 2. This is on page 2 of the staff report. It's traffic infrastructure. And that includes circulation improvements, road work, flood control, sanitary district 2, and major renovations such as the town hall project. Number 2 is all land use. That's the housing element, design standards, and the hotel ordinance that the council passed at the last, or approved to move forward at the last meeting. And also number 3 in category 2 are town operations and customer service. Cybersecurity, we'll have a grand jury report that we'll review as a council and staff in the coming month. It's at the top of our list to ensure that we protect ourselves moving forward under cybersecurity. Also digitizing our services, getting into the 21st century. We've been spending a lot of time over the last 3 years doing that. And then also phasing in lower maintenance and landscaping when appropriate. Category 3 are all quality of life issues. One of those that we want to talk to you today is and get some feedback on this subject will be the short-term rentals. We would like some feedback on how you feel about that. Also the sustainable beautification of our community, restoring our ecosystems and planting natives when appropriate, but also keeping the beautification of our community, which we're known for and so proud of. And then really in category 3, it's everything else. So as things come up, we'll evaluate them. So as we discuss these, the 3 categories that were presented by council, staff, again, had a pretty robust 4-hour conversation with the council. And what we think we heard from you, and this is, staff spent a lot of time over the last month or so developing a plan. It starts on page on page 2 and continues to page 6. And we basically outline what we think we heard from you, our work plans under these 3 categories. And so I have RJ Suko, our public works director on the line. I also have Adam Wolf, our planning and building director that is also available. And so we're not gonna go line for line. We're just gonna highlight some of the areas in our 3 categories for you, but really put it back to the council to make sure that we've met your direction and make any necessary changes. Because again, this is our roadmap really for the next 12 to 18 months. And it'll allow us to be proactive instead of reactive. It doesn't mean we can't take on other issues as they come up. As we know, we have a lot going on in the public conversation right now with what's going on in our nation. And so that doesn't mean that we can't deal with things like that for the next 18 months, right? But this is our project list, and it's important that we are in line with the council. And so with that, I'm going to start off, if I could, and I'm going to go to page 2, and we're going to start under the COVID-19 recovery in category 1. Again, we're going to do 4 things we're focused on, and it's really developing a budget plan with minimal deficit and protecting our reserves as discussed, while maintaining all town services after taking into account, really a $4.3 million loss in revenues over a 10-month period. That staff report will become, we've talked about it over the last month, that staff report will be coming to council the first meeting in July. And we'll start to have a pretty robust conversation with council about that. Number two, we want to be proactive with our documentation. Public Works through RJ Succo and Daria Carrillo, our finance director, are working side by side, ensuring that we are documenting any possible reimbursement opportunities with FEMA and Cal OES. And so we're continuing to monitor and do that, as well as the oversight with our town attorney, Teresa Stricker. Number three, we're continuing to evaluate and develop programs to support our local businesses and our most vulnerable residents. And again, those staff reports and those efforts have gone before council at our last two meetings. And then number four, really utilizing our strength within our Parks and Rec department and making sure that we're creating consistent outreach and really reaching out to our communities, those most vulnerable, to ensure that they have the resources that they need. Number two, and I'm not going to go through it too much because that's really what we've been doing and what we do all the time, it's fiscal sustainability. We're in the current position that we are because those three items of protecting our reserves, coming up with a 10-year fiscal plan, that's why we're here. We're positioned to basically get through this in one piece without cutting services. Number three is a new one. I've been talking to Daria, and what we want to do is we want to develop and enhance our budget book. And so, as you know, we have a 2-year budget. We're currently entering the second year of the budget, so our budget book is staying in place. We'll amend it at the next meeting, as I discussed earlier. But moving forward, what we want to do is we want to streamline and really redo the entire look of that book. We want it to have search capabilities. We want it to be interactive. And so we're excited about the opportunities there. And so that is a big priority with our finance team moving forward. And we think that's really important to really show that visual to the community and council as we have these robust conversations in the future. The next is communication. It's a new one. It's how do we communicate with our community and do a better job. And so we've talked about that. We've started, we have a working team of myself, Rebecca Vaughn, and our mayor, and we're working with Jen Reedy on really developing a communications plan. And so she's going through surveys, interviews, best practices, and she's going to provide a report for us over the next 6 weeks. And we can present that to council, evaluate it, and really move forward with how we talk to our community. And then again, you see some of the things that we're working towards. Interviews, townwide survey, we want to develop best practices and protocols. The community meetings have been really important. I've been really pleasantly surprised at how successful they are in engaging our community. And so those will continue using technology to our advantage. Again, the other one is the virtual recreation center and resource point page that we have on our website through Parks and Rec. Everyone's aware of that. Ashley Howe, our Parks and Rec director, has just really done an outstanding job with her staff on that front. And we also talked about the community chats. The next one is we're alive and well. We're climate hazards. We're susceptible to every natural disaster known to humankind. And so we have to be prepared for it. You're going to hear about the efforts we're making with staff. You have council members that have really pushed this to the forefront to really go and attack and to protect our community moving forward. And so with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to turn it over to RJ and Adam. I'll start with RJ. I'm going to ask RJ to go through, RJ, just start in category 1 and work your way to category 3. Any highlights that you would like the council to be aware of? And then Adam, if you can do the same. But what I'll do is I only have one other section in climate hazards in category 1. It's number 7. It's continued fire safety and preparedness efforts. And so one thing I want to make really clear to the community and to the council, through the efforts with the neighborhood response group, where we share cost of a coordinator between Larkspur and Kentfield Fire District. That will continue. It's important. It's supported through the sales tax measure. But we also have our town resilience coordinator in Marla Orth. And just because Measure C passed with the vegetation management and the new JPA, it doesn't mean that it supplants what we've been doing. It can't. It's within the rules. It only makes it better. And so everything that we've done this last year, that will continue. It'll continue to be supported from our sales tax measure. Marla has a pretty robust budget. It's about 350,000 plus, where we're going to coordinate with Public Works and our fire department, and we're going to continue to do the work that we're doing in evacuation routes and all the mitigations that we need to do moving forward. And so that's a big piece, and it'll be in concert with the fire department and through the new JPA that was formed. And just so people know, that revenue stream is about $378,000 annually to the town of Corte Madera. It comes to the town. We then move it into the fire authority, matching funds with Larkspur, who's the other partner that pays for the other 50% of the fire authority. What we do then is we were able to hire Todd Lando. We're able to have a robust fire prevention, fire vegetation management program. And so we took all of our resources, and that'll only make our programs better. It'll actually support and enhance the $350,000 effort that Marla and her team are doing right now. And so I really want to point that out, and I'm excited about that moving forward. If you ask me what I lose sleep over as your town manager, it is obviously what is going on now. It's unprecedented, but it's from the fire mitigation standpoint. We know sea level rise is coming. We can prepare for it, and we are. But fire prevention and mitigation is at the top of the list. And we just have to, just like this tree ordinance, we have to go attack this and protect our community. And so with that, the last piece, Marla and her team actually cleared about 90 to 98% of our evacuation routes on the hillside. Approximately 1,100 plus homes are on that hillside. And so we've cleared them. And so now what we're going to look at is marking them and making them, known potential evacuation routes for our community. And then RJ and his team will come behind and look at any improvements, for the steps. And we've talked about some of those where we can start to make improvements, making those evacuation routes safe when possible. And so with that, I will stop. I'm going to turn it over to RJ. RJ, just real high level on the capital improvement projects. And then Adam, if you want to jump in after, I would appreciate it. Okay.
RJ, you're muted.
Yeah, it's weird. He's not mute. He's not on mute, but we can't hear him.
Okay, well, RJ's figuring that out. I'm gonna push it over to Adam, and then RJ, just jump in when you can.
Okay. There you go. Are you sharing your? All right, thanks, Todd. So just scrolling down, hopefully you all can see my screen right now, but I'm just gonna pick up on land use, and sort of this is more of the policy piece of the work that we do in planning in the building department, rather than sort of the day-to-day project management and application and permit processing that we do. Obviously, number one and two, our number one actually was that ordinance was adopted this evening. We also had the tree and the EV charging ordinance that was introduced this evening that was on our list. So we're taking care of a lot of the things that have actually been on our work plan over the last year as we speak at this meeting, the last meeting. A big part of what we're going to be working on this year is going to be related to housing. We have sort of a new type of housing element that we're going to have to start thinking about and grappling with in terms of a significant amount of new housing legislation has been passed that increases the requirements for housing elements and when we have to update those. Many of you may know that we sort of have to update our housing elements every 8 years. We're currently right about the middle, if not, I think, year 5 of the 2015 to 2023 housing element. But by 2023, essentially the planning for that has to start this year. And that relates to things such as identifying actually a couple of things. What we're currently doing is in number 3 here, which is really starting to look at objective design standards for housing, multifamily housing. But further, we're going to be looking at really housing site opportunity sites. And that's going to be a very public discussion. I want to have a good conversation about housing, not really thinking necessarily about numbers we need to meet, but just housing in general and where and how to make it fit into our community. That's a big part of what we're going to be speaking about. So I just wanted to highlight that. And the only other thing I wanted to highlight this evening is really, you know, I'd love to get some feedback from the council on short-term rentals. This is an ordinance that we've discussed in the past, or staff has discussed with the council, just as a discussion item. I think it's one that on the positive side really is something. We don't have an ordinance today. We don't technically permit those short-term rentals in Corte Madera. There are some economic benefits that could come out of that. There are people who also see this as a useful way to utilize their property. At the same time, I think there's also some concerns about them. So it is I think if we want to move forward with that, it is something that I do see a significant amount of public outreach involved in that process. And I also see that it could be, you know, different viewpoints from our community members on whether that's a good thing or not. And so I just would like to get a sense if that's sort of on the sort of a top of the priority list, given everything else that we're working on from the council. So with that, I'll just turn it over to RJ. I think there's other things I'm happy to answer questions about.
Great, thanks, Adam. So on category 1, the main one I'd like to touch on is the climate adaptation plan. So first off, I want to use this opportunity to let everyone know we have a virtual community workshop coming up this Thursday from 5 to 6:30. It's on our town webpage. If you just Google search Town of Corte Madera Climate Adaptation Plan, you'll find our webpage, and from there, you'll be able to find where to register and how to access the Zoom meeting. Otherwise, I wanted to shift. First off, on that meeting, we'll be focusing on overall project goals for the climate adaptation plan, but also emphasizing sea level rise, vulnerabilities, and concepts, as well as fire mitigation concepts. Now, moving on to category 2, infrastructure, I wanted to just provide this visual to kind of paint the picture of really the magnitude and scale of what Public Works has been working on. You know, the bulk of what we do is put together projects and deliver, you know, construction and design work, and also some of these planning documents. But as you can see, it's a full load, and I'm very proud of our staff for how they've handled it and all the work they've done. And you know, I think it's going to be to the great benefit of the town. But we have all sorts of projects, something for, you know, just about everyone, whether it be multimodal infrastructure, parks and rec, you know, obviously the sanitary district, you know, green infrastructure, green sustainable programs. And so happy to answer any questions you have on this particular document and or the overall Public Works work plan.
Thanks, RJ. And one other thing, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I mean, there's a lot to this work plan, a lot went into it. It just goes to show you everything going on, of just how much is actually going on and who's accomplishing it. And something that we don't really share to the council and publicly, but it has come in the forefront of culture and who we are as a town. And it's on page 6 of the report. It's at the top of the page under number 2, it's training. That's where it really starts. I mean, for me as your town manager and the direction that you've given me over the last 3 years, it's to bring in a team that's high energy, that understands the importance of public service and being tireless and your effort and what you do. And that's what I think you see today from your staff. But we have really 5 areas of focus because I feel like now I have the team, and it's time to truly develop. You know, when we bring out our communications plan and who we are, and when you hear and see any of us, you hear and see the same thing. And it's customer service, it's leadership. We will succession plan, and we're doing that. Our staff development and our core values and our mission and everything that we do. And so that's coming forward. It's something that we live every day verbally when we have conversations with each other and our staff, but it's now time to put it on paper, to have a public conversation and have the council really sign off on that and understand it. And so I'm really excited about that coming forward over this next year. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it back over to the council, answer any questions, and I hope we've met your direction.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Questions from the council? Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, Todd, you mentioned evacuation routes and trails and steps and paths. And RJ, I didn't see anything in your plan about that. Did I miss that, or is that something that's going to be worked on in the next year? Because I know a lot of the, for example, the Tainer steps are a disaster. And is there any plan to start addressing some of those, as well as some of the trails up on Christmas Tree Hill, which I think are important evacuation routes? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Bob, Councilmember Ravazio. As much as I would like to make the list even larger, which it is in our own worksheet, we kind of clipped everything that's on the smaller scale, say under $100,000, and kind of combined it into a small project category. So as we do have time, for instance, on the maintenance side, we are sending crew up to the various steps, lanes, and paths to do maintenance. In addition, based on recent comments, I did recently visit Tanner Steps, and we're starting to develop some ideas on how to kind of at least present some options on how to, improve those. There's definitely some much needed improvements there, but yeah, it's also going to be part of the overall climate adaptation plan. We're looking at all modes of evacuation, especially, to your point, any steps, lanes, and paths that could also be used in addition to vehicles. There's going to be a discussion about potential e-bikes, and really that'll be something discussed on Thursday. So I hope everyone tunes in for that.
And if I could, go ahead, Councilmember Ravazio.
I was just going to say, Tainer Steps is probably more than $100,000, but so you're going to be addressing the trails and steps and paths up on Christmas Tree Hill as well, because I think those are incredibly critical evacuation routes.
Yes. So as RJ mentioned, one of the, I've given him a little bit of direction on what you see on paper now of, with our funds and where we are, of like, let's see what we can deliver. We've worked on a lot of these projects for the past couple of years. Let's deliver these over the next 12 to 18 months. And as we start to look a little farther out, to really start to focus on that, one of the things that we're looking at is focusing on right now, removing all the vegetation, right? The work that Marla's team's doing, and then actually adding, reflectors and really, and signage and improving that immediately, and working with the Corte Madera Community Foundation and the beautification committee to help partner with us. I know that there's been some conversations there. One of the other things as we move forward on the steps is the low-lying fruit. A lot of these are expensive. The Tainer Steps it will be a few $100,000 minimum. It's not that we can't do it, we're evaluating it. But there's some of the others that are mixed use, so mixed ownership. And so you have some of the trees that are on private property that are damaging the public property of the steps. And so we have some work to do there as well, of like how we negotiate that and how do we come to, agreements and partnerships. So we're looking for the low-lying fruit of clear the vegetation, improve it, sign it, and then educate everyone where it's at, and then start to, over the next 18 months, hit those areas where it's maybe a little bit lower cost, but we can do those improvements, and then bigger picture, start to attack the Tainer Steps and some of those other projects with our community partners and funding.
And I'll just point out, if it's helpful here, on page 3 of the staff report under climate hazards category 1, 5th bullet point under item 7, which is continue fire safety and preparedness efforts. That 5th bullet point is complete vegetation clearance and improvements to hillside paths and evacuation routes. So, all right, Bob, you good?
Thank you. It's great. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Awesome. David?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For Adam, you had twice mentioned the short-term rental question, and I was wondering whether this is arising because of complaints or arising because you see this as an opportunity, or just it's an aspect of regulation that is incomplete. Where's that coming from?
It's actually not arising from complaints. It's really been something that from time to time has come up in council discussions. I think we've had 2 different discussions with the councils over the last, I'd say, 4 years. You know, it is also a way that I think we have sort of an ordinance right now that doesn't permit it. It doesn't speak to short-term rentals. So it's not directly addressed. And so a lot of communities have either adopted an ordinance that is tailored to their community and also does derive some TOT tax because frankly, people are doing it regardless. But I think it is important to note we don't get a lot of community complaints about it. We don't see a high volume compared to other communities south of us that see a much higher volume of short-term rentals. But it is something that in the past there's been discussions about, frankly, something that the town should address at some point in the future. And so it's really just maybe a holdover from prior meetings, frankly.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I've got a bunch of comments, but I'm going to save that for the comment period.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Yeah, Fred?
Yeah, a couple of questions. On number 4, environmental D, where it talks about EV charging at town hall, is that limited in scope to just town hall? Or are you going to look at other town facilities like town park parking lot, Miki Park, or is it just limited to City Hall?
So definitely if we were to make improvements at the town hall facility, we would try to incorporate additional EV charging stations. You know, we have one currently active. And then I think we're open to, creating more EV spots at all town facilities. And perhaps Adam or Todd may know which ones have been proposed or might be in the works. But yeah, I think it's something we are interested in wherever possible, wherever it makes sense.
Okay, thanks. And I have a couple more, Eli.
Yeah, go for it.
Just for clarification, number 6, sanitary district number 2, should that piece be carved out and should there be a separate work plan that's under the sanitary district, given that there's a separate board and a separate entity? Should that be carved out? Because otherwise, I'm sorry, Tom, otherwise what happens is that if you go to any minutes or any records in the sanitary district, I don't think that it may show up, but it's indirectly. It's more, again, I don't know if I'm splitting hairs here. It just seems like if it's a separate entity and it's an animal unto itself, should that be separated out?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's something we can look at. I'll just tell you, it is a subsidiary of the town. From the staff perspective, it's actually helpful to have it on a single document because, again, the sanitary district is run by town staff. And so when we develop a town work plan, it's actually helpful for us to have it this way. But we can certainly separate it out, for the sanitary district board to actually speak to their own work plan, to your point. Okay. So I think we could do both. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It may be more of a question for Teresa. I don't know if that should be split out or not, or if it's one half dozen or the other.
So, I mean, you're talking about it in this meeting, so it would go in the minutes of this meeting. I think probably most people do realize because it's a subsidiary, there are some just general conversations that would happen in the course of the council meeting. If you were being asked to take an action on this item, I would suggest that we put it on a sanitary district meeting. But I think since this is just a general discussion of what the work plan is, I think it can stay here. If there's more you want to do to bring it forward, certainly you can do that.
Okay, and it makes every staff's life easier by leaving it here, so it's good. And the last question is, under quality of life, it's page number 6, number 5, begin master planning project for town park. Personally, I don't like the word beginning, because where it says beginning, you could begin it, 16 months from now, and oh, good, look, we completed the beginning part. No offense. Plus, the other thing is, I know Park and Rec Commission, Commissioners Ravazio and also Phipps began this process, and they did some legwork, I think about like 5 to 7 months ago. So it seems like some of the groundwork is already laid. So I don't know if that just needs to be changed, because I would like to see it not just begin, but actually be completed.
So change the word begin to complete.
Thank you.
Complete the master, okay. Will do. No, thank you. Well said, you're right. And no disrespect to those that who've been working many years actually on this thing, so.
Then, I'm sorry, and then do you come back to us like every 6 months or so with an update to the plan? I'm just trying to get an idea, I'm getting ahead of myself, an idea of the timeline.
It's usually, at the end of the year, we'll do it through the process, but it's something that we certainly can do every 6 months. I mean, it's a good idea probably to make sure that we're on task and on track. So I think it's a good recommendation. I'm happy to do it.
And then one other question, has there ever been any consideration, again, I'm more like a visual type person, to taking this and putting it, I use Excel, but I know there may be other software, putting it like on a grid type format, so we could actually see like, here's the item, the stat, if it's been completed or not, and then a comment section. Again, I'm not talking 25 columns, just something simple so it's more visual, where if you give it to us, we can just view it, scan it, and go, okay, complete, ordinance was done, town council approved it. It just seems like it'd be easier if it's in that type of format.
Yes, and the answer is yes. With the help of Rebecca, Teresa, RJ, and Adam, they developed a matrix just for that. So now if we get direction from you, we'll actually we'll look at the next 12 months worth of council meetings, and we'll actually put the boxes for the ordinances and the resolutions and the staff reports. You'll actually have that work plan, and you'll be able to see it. And we'll be able to then have a discussion with you of moving pieces around as we go, of delaying projects or moving them up, forward or not. And so, yes, we have something that we can maybe add to, our future agendas. We could actually put something like that, on that agenda item.
Okay, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Fred. Any other questions from council members? If not, we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Members of the public, if you want to comment on this work plan, please raise your hand in Zoom or email your public comments to publiccomment@tcmmail.org. If you've already emailed a comment in about this, you can speak if you want, and we won't read your email, or if you'd prefer, we can just read your email and you don't have to speak. So we'll give you guys a minute now to put your hands up. Rebecca, did anybody email a public comment on the work plan?
Thank you, Mayor Beckman. No, no public comments were received by email for this item.
Okay, great. We've got one hand up from the public from Ms. Patricia Ravazio.
Thank you, Mayor Beckman and Council. I'm very interested in a couple of the items here. As mentioned, the Town Park Master Plan. I would love to request, and I don't know that Parks and Rec can do this all by ourselves. I think it's more of a joint effort with the council. But I think we really need to incorporate Corte Madera Center in our long-term planning so that we know what the intent is, when the leases run out. Are we going to try to begin to annex some of this property to be used for recreation and community services and other town needs? Is it possible, as we've discussed a couple of times, to do a lot split and create on one half of the lot behind the gas station, potentially some senior housing, which we have zero of in Corte Madera. We have no designated senior housing. And it seems like an ideal location to have it right behind the park and the new dog park. So there's lots of possibilities. The dog store, the pet store, was originally a small neighborhood supermarket. And I think if you were to talk to the people who live in the area, the idea of a return to that kind of thing might have a lot of appeal. So even if it's things that can't happen for a long term because of leases, it would be really nice to sort of know where we're going, and not just for Town Park, but for Madera Center. And then quickly, I do think it would be really great for the town to start a conversation about the Airbnbs and the short-term rentals. It is a really nice opportunity for people who need extra income, and especially with the new ADU rules. So I think you're going to probably see more of it. And so it would be smart, I think, to get ahead and find out what the community wants and what the council thinks, so that we at least know, you know, we put the train on the tracks before it hits us from complaints or whatever it might be. And plus it's an income opportunity, right, to gather those taxes. So that's it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Pat. All right, and that was our only hand up. So we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the council for comments. Anybody want to speak on this? Yeah, David.
I am so impressed in a few things. One, clearly Todd and the staff listened to our council planning session. Number two, there's just, I think, this fabulous integration of what we have talked about as a council and what staff is talking about. Third, talk about fast tracking. Staff is not waiting around or hanging on or letting us have the second word. They're already proceeding on things that we put out, and particularly that you set forth, Mr. Mayor, in your agenda for the coming year. I just think this work plan is really, truly outstanding. It reflects our highest priorities in safety, et cetera, and financial and fiscal well-being. I am just to answer Adam's question, I would be interested in seeing some kind of short-term rental ordinance come forward, because in agreeing with public comment, I think that it's both an opportunity and a sort of prevention of risk. We absolutely don't want to have party houses anywhere, but we definitely should be open to flexible use of individual properties. I can't say enough how happy I am with the quality of this work plan, really.
Thank you, David. Anybody else want to make any comments? Yeah, Charles.
So one, I just, we talked about fire clearing and the amount of money that we're going to get appropriated to it, but I also just wanted to put out there that it also increases property values, because I've gone around and seen some of the areas where it's been cleaned up, and is where we all like lots of greenery and overgrowth. When it's kept, it has a much greater curb appeal for the overall community. And I think that there's a real asset value to that should be understood. And then the other one was the short-term rentals. So I wanted to speak to that. I don't think that ultimately the goal should be an ordinance straight out of the box. I think this is a larger community discussion. And I think we really need to open it up to the overall community to see if we even want to take the time and effort to put together an ordinance. So part of it is like you had said, it would take a robust offering. And I just think if you come as though we're already working towards it, it's going to complicate the discussion, right? Because even internally within myself, I'm conflicted about the benefits and then the drawbacks of allowing that in the community and my own personal self, right? So I would like to open that up though, because I think it's always good to be revisiting what works for the community. Yeah, I think it needs to be discussed in light of the COVID-19 too. I'd sent some emails earlier about it to you, Adam, about, the effect on basically towns that are too resilient or too reliant on that type of income source, or properties ultimately that fall to that, how poorly they suffer in times like this. Airbnb in general is just really suffering, right? So I think we really have to have a broad discussion about what it means for the community other than just income. But I would like to have that discussion myself. And outside of that, I think it's great. You did listen, and my only thing is I think you've already accomplished half the stuff on the list. So I want to add some stuff. Just kidding.
Awesome. Thank you, Charles.
Very good.
Anybody else? Yeah, Fred and then Bob.
Yeah, I'll just echo some of the comments that were already made. I just want to thank and acknowledge staff. I want to say you guys are the best. In the midst of COVID-19, you know, between trying to come up with different ordinances, trying to solve issues with that, keep businesses going, funding businesses, it runs the whole gambit. And on top of all that, you come up with the work plan that have the confidence that you're going to be able to execute on. I just find it totally amazing. Again, I really thank staff, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Fred. Bob?
Yeah, just quickly again. Yeah, same thing. Staff, great job on this. Great plan. Looking forward to continue working on it. And I would absolutely have the conversation about short-term rentals. They're happening. People are doing it. Go on any number of websites, and you will see that they're doing it in Corte Madera. The question is, do we want to regulate it or not? So it's not a question of whether or not people are doing it. The question is, they are doing it. Do we want to regulate it? And if so, how? And I think we should have that discussion. Thanks.
Totally agree that is an issue that's going to warrant a discussion among council and you know, probably public workshops or something along those lines. All I'll say other than that is that I'm pretty freaking excited about this work plan. Great job to you guys. I think this represents not only a bold vision from the council, but also the ambition and work ethic of our staff. I think, you know, this is a big, you know, this is a heaping plate of awesome stuff here that's going to really benefit the town of Corte Madera and our residents. And I want to thank you guys for putting this together and for your commitment to helping us see this through. Do you guys feel like you have your direction?
We do. Thank you. I really appreciate
awesome.
it.
Alrighty, that was 6A. That brings us to item 6B, which is approval of the request from Mill Valley Refuse to postpone their rate application until, well, staff, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. So James Averoni, the managing director of Mill Valley Refuse Service, is also on the line, and so I'll put him in the hot seat in a second. But I want to share with the council of what we're asking in the conversations that both Jim and I have been having over the past month or so. But in February of 2006, the town of Corte Madera and Mill Valley Refuse Service entered a 26-year, 6-month contract. So it runs from 2006 to December 31st of 2026. So Mill Valley Refuse is required to submit a rate adjustment application for consideration by council by a specific date, and that has to happen before July 1st. And so that is why we're giving notice now via the contract. And it's really, and Jim can jump in here, it's because of what's happening with COVID-19 and the businesses and residents. It's affected the revenue models. And so initially we were back in April advised by Mill Valley Refuse of the intent to raise fees. As we've been given some better projections, we are all in agreement, and we agree with Jim that we should postpone this through the first quarter and reevaluate it come September. And so that's really what we're asking you to consider at this time. So recognize that we're probably going to have a rate adjustment. Originally, I think for Corte Madera, it was in the 8% range. That's probably lower by a few percentage points by the estimates when we move to September. Again, that would be for 3 quarters instead of 4. In that meantime, in that span, as we look at those revenues, your staff went back and looked at the robust conversation we had last year, specifically our vice mayor and Jim Andrews, who was on the council at the time, asked for a couple things if we ever came back to you. And it was to look at, as you know, we have 3 rates. Most jurisdictions have 1 to 2 rates within Mill Valley Refuse. It's a flat rate and a hill rate. We have 3. We have a flat rate, a hill rate, and a Christmas tree hill rate. So we're working on a number of scenarios with Mill Valley Refuse on what it would look like if we went from 3 rates to 2, or if we even went to 1 rate. What that would look like, the pros and cons. The second thing that we're looking at, as you know, and RJ's on the line and can speak to it, why we get franchise fees and what the thought process is behind that. As you know, as these rate adjustments go up, our franchise fees, the town brings in more revenue. And so in these times, you know, from your staff, that does not feel appropriate. And we want to see if we can help our businesses and our residents. And so we're working with Mill Valley Refuse on what does that mean for every percentage point of increase? What are some things we can do within our current franchise agreement to offset those costs? So where maybe the town gets less in revenues on the franchise agreement of increases, where we can offset that back to our residents and the commercial businesses, or one or the other, or both, depending on how the council feels about it. So we have a lot of work to do. We're working closely with Jim, and so we just need a little bit more time. And with that, I'm going to stop. Jim's on the line, and you can jump in and speak to this much better than I. So go ahead, Jim. You're on mute. Yeah.
Well, there we go. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I think that Todd has pretty much summed up, you know, all the issues in front of us. We thought we were not really comfortable back in March coming in with a rate application that we were just at the beginning of the COVID-19 shutdown, and we were just beginning to feel the cancellation of lots of commercial business services. And so we were making projections that we thought might not be accurate later on in the year. Now, back in March, we were naively believing that the shutdown would last a couple of weeks and commercial business would pick back up, and that we would come, in fact, this month with an updated and amended rate application based on improved commercial revenue projections. But as we all know now, that didn't happen. It's just beginning to happen now that businesses are finally starting to kick back into gear. So we hope to come back in September. July we'll have an amended rate application, which we hope will show increased commercial revenues, and that we'll be able to come in with a lower rate application than the original one we had to produce in March. Not making any predictions at this point because we really need to see, especially by the end of this month, how things are looking with commercial businesses and how they are resuming service, so that we can make better projections.
Thanks, Jim. And just for council, just a brief history, you know, again, and Jim can touch on it. We had, you know, the changes with recycling and what happened in China a couple of years ago. And we saw, you know, across the board for all jurisdictions, not only under the scope of Mill Valley Refuse, but within the county and Bay Area, we saw a 13.77% increase in 2018. In 2019, it was approximately 4.08%. If you compare our charges, our rates to everyone else in the county, we are very comparable. It is within the range. And so there's nothing that jumps out at me. I think the analysis that we owe the council per your direction at the last meeting is really, again, how do we look at, do we continue with the current, you know, 3 rates, or do we bring it to 2, 1? What's that conversation look like? And then also, what are some things that the town can consider from our current franchise agreement, you know, of deferring some revenues and bringing it back to offset some cost. And so those are the things that we're working on. If there's anything else that you'd like to provide direction, it would be really helpful for staff and for Jim moving forward.
Okay, questions from the council. Charles?
Yeah, hi James, thanks for being here tonight. So one of the things I think the council did in the negotiations in the last couple of years, we switched to the one-off, one-on week larger cans, you know, to help clean up your recycling streams. And I haven't really, I mean, you know, I've been doing that program as we all have, and I guess has that been an effective way to help you in cost savings, and is that a program that's, you know, you'd like to continue? And if ultimately those kind of cooperations work, are there other ones that you're currently thinking about that you would bring forward, you know, for now and in the future?
Yeah, the recycling program that we introduced in the past year is working as we had hoped it would. We were experiencing about a 16.7% contamination rate with all the recycling we were collecting in a single stream, and according to an internal waste audit at Marin Sanitary, it's looking like our contamination rate has gone down to about 10.4%. So we have seen a significant reduction in contamination. We hope to, in this coming year, do hire an outside agency to do a really in-depth look at at our waste stream, that is to say the recycling waste stream. So we not only just get the general percentage from 16 to 10 that we got from Marin Sanitary, but they will give us a breakdown of by weight of the exact contaminants that are still in our waste stream, and that'll give us the opportunity to educate our residents with very specific information about how to improve the contamination rate even more. And we are experiencing savings. Not only is it cheaper to dump our less contaminated material at Marin Sanitary, but of course we're saving lots of gas. We're not driving up to the Redwood landfill anymore with our recycle trucks. We're just going right basically across the street from where our home base is, and the Marin Sanitary processing plant is. So we're saving a lot of gas, and which is of course improves the carbon footprint of our whole operation, and we are experiencing just what we hope to experience, less contamination, and we're dumping at a cheaper price than what we were dumping at before.
Great. So thank you for answering that, because that has been something that's been weighing on my mind, and will make it easier for me to maybe wait till September for everything else. But I think the only other one I have is COVID-19, outside of affecting the commercial waste streams, has also probably enhanced the amount of packaging that you see in the residential pickup, right? Because everybody's having stuff delivered. Ultimately, is that a revenue stream? And is cardboard still readily recyclable within the United States? And so therefore you haven't seen that as a problem as much as a gold mine or something, or is it an issue? Because also, the town council and others have talked about ways to think about that long term. And I just wanted to hear your feelings on that, and if that'll have any kind of long-term impact if these work from home and shelter in place strategies go for any kind of prolonged time. Once you answer that, then I'm fine with waiting for the actual cost. But
yeah, I always like to jump in when we get questions about is this or that a profitable waste stream. We're just and I like to remind everybody that we are just haulers. We don't own the processing plant, and so we don't actually make money because there's a lot more cardboard in our waste stream. Cardboard is a still a profitable commodity, and the processing plant makes money off of cardboard, but that in turn reduces our or keeps the rate for which that we have to pay to dump the material lower. So the savings pass down that way to the ratepayers. Cardboard is still, yes, it is one of the things that is still valuable. It is still, people will still it can still be readily sold. It's bought, it is recycled. So right, it's a good thing.
Thanks for the dialogue.
Cardboard is not a bad thing.
Yeah, thanks for the dialogue. And, you know, I'm new to the council, so thanks for also explaining your role and what we're really negotiating and where you drop off, but ultimately there might be synergies and overall contractual and, like, you know, where you pay to basically drop it off versus where, you know, they'll take as much as they can and maybe even reward you in other ways. So I appreciate that, so that it helps me evaluate as we move forward on a lot of different things. So thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Jim. I have a quick question for Todd. I was a little confused. So we're just discussing whether to wait until the new rate application comes in, right? Because you mentioned something about, looking at a two versus three, tariff system and stuff. I was just a little confused. Are we trying to have that discussion tonight, or is this okay? Got it.
This is just, to accept it and then understand and allow us to come back to you. I just wanted to let you know what staff is working on during that period of time if you allow us to do the work. Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we'll be ready. We'll be ready when this comes back in July then to actually kind of dive into the application itself and maybe, any other ancillary questions. Okay, yeah, awesome. Got it.
Just a quick thing about those flat and hill rates. A couple of years ago, Belvedere decided they didn't want to have a split flat and hill rates, so we presented them with a rate sheet at a rate application time that blended the two rates together, so that there was one rate for everybody, and that's what we will do. We will give you a look at what the rates will be like if we blend them all together based upon the next rate application.
Okay, awesome. We'll keep an eye out for that in July then. Okay, thank you. All right, David. You're mute.
I cannot hear.
He is muted.
Okay.
Unmute. There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry. It was actually in my first meeting on the council when you were last in front of us and had the pleasure of increasing our recycling rates as my first act on our town council. A little bit embarrassing. Anyway, on the very latter point that you were mentioning, I'm hoping that you can find a way at least to flatten the curve. If you don't have a flat rate across the whole town, as rates go up by percentage, the point that I made 2 years ago was that you increase by, let's say, 5% or 10, whatever the percent is, the absolute dollars goes up more for those of us on the Hill who have a higher charge to begin with. So if you can at least flatten the curve, that would be terrific. The two other questions that I'm going to be raising at least by the time of September are, how is the green can working, and are people properly putting their food scraps in the green cans more and more? And finally, have you looked at electric dump trucks? There are some out there in the marketplace, and they apparently are lower cost in operations and a lot lower cost in fuel because there's no fuel except electricity.
Yeah, I'll take the electric truck question first. To the best of my knowledge, electric trucks do not work well in areas where there are a lot of hills. They still lack the kind of power needed to handle hills very well. They're better suited for cities that are flat, and we have not experienced or been able to really find electric trucks that are suitable for our service areas at this time. The technology doesn't seem to be quite there yet, despite sometimes you read, and I've read industry or journal newspaper articles about the coming big electric trucks, but we're not seeing that as a possibility yet. And we think they're underpowered and are not suitable for our areas.
Keep watching.
As far as green cans go, I don't really have a sense of how much food people are putting into their green cans. I just know that the green cans are very well used. Our trucks are loaded on all of their routes, and so people are making great use of the green can. Whether or not they're putting lots of food waste into the green can, I'm not really sure of that. It's a hard thing to measure. I could ask my drivers to give me some anecdotal notion of what they think they see going in. But I don't have any clear numbers on.
It's really a look at how much food garbage is going into the regular waste, right?
Yeah.
Right, reducing that. Thank you very much for those comments. Look forward to seeing you again in September or so.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Thanks, David. Anybody else have questions for Jim here? If not, we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment. Members of the public, if you have a comment on this item, please go ahead and raise your hand through Zoom or email publiccomment@tcmmail.org. Rebecca, have we gotten any emailed public comments on this?
Thank you, Mayor Beckman. No emailed public comments on this item.
Great, thank you. And I'm not seeing any hands up, so we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring it back to the council for any further comments, or if there are none, we'll take a motion to approve this request from MVRS to postpone consideration of the rate application until a new application is submitted in July.
I'll move that we do that.
I'll second.
Thank you. Alrighty, great. Rebecca, can we have a vote, please?
Councilmember Casissa?
Yes.
Councilmember Lee?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravazio?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Kuhnhart?
Yes.
Mayor Beckman?
Yes. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you. See you all again in a couple of months.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Item 6C is a verbal update from the town manager regarding the latest changes in the public health orders, updates on outdoor business, especially in Menke Park, and any other town manager reports.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Really, my report is limited as I gave from my report of last week. As you know, indoor retail is now allowed. Mike Moriarty and I basically walked the town yesterday. We're probably about 80% functional in our retail businesses right now, so they're slowly coming back online. And so we're looking forward to that. It looks like everyone's following the procedures and protocols to keep safe distance and following best practices. So we're very pleased to see that. Again, no updates on Menke Park from Adam's update of last week, but we will start to implement some of those measures over the coming 10 days. So look out for that. And then I just also, we talked about it at our community chat, but just under my normal town manager reports, I thought Chief Norton was outstanding, and I expected nothing less. The conversation of what's going on now and in police departments across the land, I can't speak to them, but I can certainly speak to our police authority and department. And it's a conversation about culture and doing things the right way. We're not perfect. But I was really excited to see him engage the community and be able to tell our story. And so I thought that went really good. The community feedback has been outstanding. We're going to continue that conversation next week at the Police Council. Rebecca, can you confirm, is that Monday the 22nd? I'm sorry, all the meetings are running together for me. Well,
yes, it will be Monday the 22nd at 6:00 p.m. And I believe the agenda may be published tomorrow.
Thank you. And really what we're
on Thursday.
Thanks, Rebecca. And so what we're looking at is now we're going to engage the police council in our community and start to have a really thoughtful multi-meeting type of conversation about the police department. And, we're going to go through culture, training, police tactics. There's a number of things that are coming down at the state level of mandates. And so we're going to talk about all those things. And then from it, I think what you're going to hear is that there's a lot of good things happening in your police department. And I think also what'll happen is there's probably some things that we can do better, and we're going to implement those, and we're going to have that conversation. So that's coming, and I see that really going on for the next few months moving forward. And with that, I have no other updates. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. Council reports. I guess we'll just go down the line. Fred, do you have anything to report?
Yeah, just attended the Ross Valley Paramedic Authority meeting, last meeting, the MCC monthly meeting, and then I've been attending the MCC, too many M's and C's, sorry, Economic Recovery, which meets every Friday. I also just attended the CMSA meeting, which was last week, just as an observer. And then I also met with Jason Dow, who's the CMSA General Manager. I spent 1 hour with him. He gave me the background of who they are, what they are, how they work, how they're put together. And then we spent the next 2 hours going through the whole facility. If anybody has ever had a chance, I think they do tours occasionally. If you get a chance, go take a tour of that place. It's totally amazing. It's almost everything they touch, it's recyclable somehow. I spent 3 hours with them, but it was well worth it. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Fred. Charles, anything to report?
So I didn't report about it last week because we had such a long marathon, but I have attended my first Safe Schools. And I think a lot of the discussion was about the fall opening and how it might affect student drop-off and students getting to school. And they were looking at what that might be, or at least speculating and thinking of temporary kind of means to help with that. And so the discussions were preliminary, trying to identify and get in front of it. I think that dialogue will continue, but if necessary, they'll need to engage with the town to help work that out. And we had our town engineers also present, so they're aware. And then we actually went and looked at a couple different conditions that were identified in some of the neighborhoods to do low cost improvements just for overall bike safety. So that was really good to do. And then I continue to contribute and talk to the TAM group. And we have our meeting next week, I believe. But they did have the executive meeting this week, and I think we're making progress through our own contribution as a town through me, and then also David is also attending the executive ones to help give some oversight and input on it, and I appreciate that as well. So, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Bob, anything to report? You are muted, sir.
How's that? Great. Just briefly, I just wanted to echo Todd's comments. I attended Chief Norton's phone call last Thursday, and it was terrific. I mean, just really informative, answered lots of great questions. And I also just want to point out a lot of the policies he was talking about had been put in place by Todd Cusimano when he was chief. So it was just really gratifying to hear. But it was terrific. Great job by Mike. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. David, anything to report?
That whole conversation has given rise to a lot of long conversations in our mixed race household. And some of that has spilled over, alas, into the hands of Chief Norton. I started to report briefly on my first attendance of a meeting of the Disaster Preparedness Committee, and I want to just say that Gabe Paulson, the Larkspur co-chair, and I have had a great follow-up meeting, and his themes for that, as well as he's a participant in the Fire Prevention JPA, are going to be equity, environment, efficiency, and effectiveness. And I think those things apply to landscape treatment as well as to policing. So that's all I'm going to that's all I'm going to offer up today. The other committees that I'm on have taken a pause this month.
Awesome. Okay, thanks. I've just got a few quick things. I've been attending the weekly, every Friday, MCCMC recovery meetings with Fred. That's just kind of cities getting together and sharing best practices and sharing, what they're doing. We've also got a couple managers in there as well to kind of let us know what's happening at the managerial level. Had a couple CMSA meetings since we last spoke. Nothing really to report there. Everything seems to be going great. RJ already mentioned, but there is a climate adaptation plan workshop on Thursday from 5 to 6:30. You can find information on the town's website on how to participate in that. And the last thing I'll mention is that we've got an upcoming chipper weekend at the Cove School parking lot. It's the last weekend in June. I want to say it's June 27th and 28th. Corte Madera residents can bring their yard waste and have it chipped for free. That is all that I've got to report. Our last agenda item is reviewing the draft agenda for the next meeting. Are there any comments on that agenda? All right, well, if that's the case, then we are adjourned.